Welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for January 14th, 2014. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Today I'm joined by Jim Clausing, a small cast today, just Jim and myself. And again, I'm John Hogoboom. So we'll have a quick show for you today, hopefully, but we've got some good topics to discuss. The first one that I want to talk about is that there was recent press in the past week. The Syrian Electronic Army, who has been notable, if you recall, probably sometime last year, they compromised an account and posted some news on there, which had an impact on the stock market. They're kind of notorious for compromising social media accounts. And again, what they did here in this recent attack is they compromised the social media accounts for the blog and Twitter accounts for Microsoft's Skype service, and they were able to post some things on their blog and Twitter feeds for Skype, as though they were Skype, and that caused a little bit of a panic. Subsequently, Microsoft they're very quick to act and redact those posts that were put on there and clarify that was not them. But the real point of this story, in my opinion, is that if you are a company and you have social media presences, either on Twitter or Facebook or any of the other ones, LinkedIn, there's tons of different social media types of services out there that companies can become members of. Whoever manages those accounts for you, you want to be very careful that they have some sort of protection around their login IDs and passwords. Obviously, they want to do that for all of their accounts, right? But more so, you want to be really careful with these login IDs and passwords for the social media accounts so that they do not become compromised and somebody can't, post as that company. And, it could be a negative impact to your business and whatnot. So that's really the crux of that story. You can take a look at the article we have there. I don't know if you had any other thoughts on that, Jim.
It's kind of a hard one when you have a large organization and you've got shared access to these accounts. In general, we tend to say, you shouldn't ever share your passwords. Well, for these social media kinds of things, Twitter accounts, if you've got a large PR organization, you likely are sharing them. So you need to have some processes around how they get shared, and they need to be changed relatively frequently so that if you do slip up, it's not going to sit there for a long time, and you need to be monitoring them also on a fairly regular basis. You need to be actively monitoring what's going out on your own feeds so that you can catch these things in a hurry and update the passwords, delete the inappropriate posts.
Right. And if you have any type of password vaulting, I know there's some of the services have two-factor authentication built into them. If they do have that, you should use those. If you have maybe an internal password vaulting type of thing where you need a two-factor to get into that, such that you can get access to those social media accounts, that would be a good thing as well. The other important thing that just occurred to me that I know we encourage here is to do a lot of user education, especially to those users who manage those social media accounts and use those. Make sure you educate them very well on spear phishing attacks, what to look for, how to be wary for them. Typically, that's how, notably Syrian Electronic Army, how they've been compromising these. They perform, very targeted phishing attacks against those people that they know are, responsible for maintaining those social media presences for those companies, and they harvest the login and credentials in that way. So you want to make sure those users are educated on how to be safe users on the internet and with email too, to not be tricked into revealing their getting phished for their login credentials.
Right, and not to be updating their, not to be posting the Twitter updates and that kind of stuff on hotel networks, in Starbucks, places where they can get that kind of stuff sniffed too. You just need to be really careful about that.
Right, that's another really good point. There's a lot of little security facets that sometimes we think about, because we're all extra paranoid as security people, but these, some of your PR people that might be managing these social media sites might not think about. So good to educate them as best as possible. The other story I had before we get to Jim's stories is there was a recent report last week that the Yahoo's website on their advertising, they have the little advertising, widgets or whatever that are inserted into pages and search results. They were compromised, so that advertising feed was injected with some what we call malvertising. It's malware advertising, and it basically presents advertisements on the Yahoo page that if you clicked on them would lead to malware. So they did some analysis of this, and it appears to have only impacted users in Europe. So Yahoo, when they decide what ads to show on everybody's page, there's certain ones that are targeted for different parts of the world. So these particular ads that were that led to malware were only being served to people in Europe. So North America, Asia Pac, Latin America, they did not receive. Nobody from those countries received these ads on their search results or their other Yahoo pages that you might go to. Case in point, just looking at this article here, this is a really good example. On the right-hand corner here, Information Week, they have a picture of an ad, and this is probably pulled in from a third-party advertising network, same thing that Yahoo does. They have established agreements with different third-party advertising providers, and they pull in ads for different parts of what people might be searching for. They'll get targeted ads that will pop up on the page for them. In any event, this was pretty quickly discovered and taken care of. Again, it would have only impacted people in Europe, not like I said, North America, Asia Pac, Latin America, even I guess Asia Pac would be Russia and whatnot. If you did click on one of these URLs, if you were in Europe and you have to click on one of these advertisements, what they did is they kind of led you to an exploit kit page. And we've talked a lot about Black Hole Exploit Kit, and there's a whole bunch of other ones out there. This one happened to be the Magnitude Exploit Kit, and what that does is it tries, when you hit that page, it tries a whole bunch of different attack vectors. So it might try a Flash vector, it might try Java, it might try, I can't even think of the other ones, but basically it might, an Internet Explorer exploit. So they try to figure out what possible things your machine might be vulnerable to, that they can drop a piece of malware on your machine without you, doing anything other than visiting that web page. And in this case, it was most successful with a Java exploit, a recent Java exploit that was in that Magnitude exploit kit. And when the users, the actual malware payload that was being dropped was one of 6 various ones. There were a bunch. One was Zeus. I can't remember all of them. There's 6 different variants of malware that could have been delivered to the user who clicked on the ad. So Yahoo is quickly taking care of this. Again, it comes down to whoever, you might even have a website and have some sort of third-party advertisement vendor feed that you pull advertisements in from in order to kind of increase your revenue stream for your website. So, you might want to be careful about that, or make sure that, it's a pretty trusted vendor for advertisements, so that there's no worry about someone maliciously injecting their own advertisements in there that might lead to malware. That's all I had on that one. So I guess the next story that we have is there's a new version of Bind out there, Jim, and I guess people should be upgrading.
Yeah, I just noticed today on my systems at home that I had gotten a new version of Bind pushed to me, run Ubuntu at home, and so some of the Linux distros were pushing out new versions. But what that really reminded me of, though, was the Internet Systems Consortium last month posted reminding us that some of the old versions are reaching end of life now. Bind 9.9 has been out for a while. 9.7 is now at end of life, and even 9.6 ESV, the extended support version, will reach end of life in June. Basically, once they hit a certain version, then 6 months later they end of life a previous version. So just a reminder, if you're running bind, to make sure you've got your latest version, you've got your patches being installed. 9.9, if you're not running it, is probably the one you want to move to relatively soon. It had some significant improvements in DNSSEC capabilities, especially zone signing kinds of stuff was much easier with 9.9 than previous versions. And we've had some, I don't even remember exactly, in the last couple of months there was an issue with bind that was being exploited for something. I can't remember now what it was, but so you need to have the latest versions with the latest patches applied. And bind 9.7 is now end of life, and 9.6 soon will be. So you at least need to be at 9.8, preferably at 9.9. So that was all that was really about. Just a reminder that since DNS is so important to the functioning of the internet, make sure your DNS servers are up to date.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is kind of the glue that keeps everything working on the internet, as you said. The other kind of thing that I would point out is if you are running a DNS server and it's exposed to the internet, we've talked about this before. There's lots of DNS amplification / reflection attacks. You want to make sure that your DNS server is not being used for that. I think this version, Bind 9.9 is one of the ones that has implemented some additional features for throttling of requests, so that it helps with that type of DNS amplification attack to kind of mitigate if someone's trying to use your DNS server for that purpose. So that's another good thing, or another good reason to upgrade.
Yep, that was one of the things that we did talk about in the last couple of months.
Right. All right, thanks for that one. So yeah, if you have bind and you're running an old version, I know some people probably are running old versions and don't even know they're running DNS. So kind of take a look at your network, see what you've got running, and upgrade as applicable. So the next story that you wanted to talk about, Jim, was there's a little bit more information on the Target breach and maybe some other victims involved.
Yeah, we talked about this last week about the Target breach, and a little more information has come out about that recently. And then there's also now some stories starting to come out that some other retailers may also have been hit. I know in this Reuters story that I linked to, they're talking about Neiman Marcus has now admitted that they also got hit. But one of the things that did come out in the last week about the Target breach, we had heard that it was the point-of-sale terminals that were originally infected, but a little bit more information about the malware has come out now, and there's some discussion about how they were using memory scraping to grab the credit card numbers and the PIN information for the debit cards. And this is really not all that new. I mean, some malware has had this capability in the past. I guess Visa actually sent some alerts out to the companies that offer Visa cards and to their payment processors, alerting them to issues of memory scraping in the past. Apparently twice in 2013 they sent out alerts to their customers. But one of the things that this brings to mind, it reminds me of, we see all these, today is Patch Tuesday for Microsoft, and there are a couple patches that I'll talk about in a little bit that came out there. But we're used to, all of these patches, and Microsoft tends to, if it's a local privilege escalation, they only rate it as important rather than critical, because it requires somebody to do something on the system to get it there in the first place. But these even local privilege escalation exploits are something to be leery of and to patch as soon as possible, because if the bad guys manage to get some sort of foothold on your system, via drive-by malicious ads, getting the user to click on a phishing email or whatever, then they can quickly use these local privilege escalations to get higher level privileges. If you can get up to root or local administrator, domain administrator, you've got free reign. You can see everything going on in the system. You can read all of the data that's in RAM. So whereas ordinary users can't necessarily read the memory of processes running under some other user ID, these local privilege escalations used in conjunction with other methods of getting on the system, allow you to be able to read anything from any process, and all of these, in this case, credit card numbers, they all have to reside in memory for some period of time, so that they can be acted on, sent on up the line to the credit card company or whatever. So it's just a reminder that even these patches that get rated as just important really are serious and need to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, Jim. And I guarantee, well, I shouldn't guarantee, but I would venture to guess that a lot of these companies, big and small, that have these point-of-sale systems that run Windows, they're probably all running as a regular user account, not as administrator, because there's no reason for those machines to run as an administrative account. So like you said, if someone can get malware installed on there running as the local user, and that version of Windows is not patched and it has a local user, local privilege escalation vulnerability, that piece of malware could escalate its privileges to admin, and now it can do whatever it needs on the machine. And as you said, some of the analysis they've been doing is definitely seeing that these versions of malware are accessing memory in order to get out the financial details that they need from the transaction. So you want to be careful of that, because once you're on the system, if it's not patched as tightly as you would think, there's a good chance that they can escalate their privileges. And we see that a lot of times with malware, APT, all kinds of events where that's the first thing the attacker is going to try to do, is see how much escalation of privileges you can get. Okay, so one other quick one, I guess. There's some patches that are out now, Microsoft, Adobe, Oracle, etc.
Yeah, today is a big day for patches, and I don't have the details on all of them yet. As we're recording this, they're not all out yet. But today was Microsoft Patch Tuesday. They, as previously announced, released 4 patches. None of them were rated critical by Microsoft. But again, this is a case where I think maybe at least one of them probably should have been. One of them is MS14-001, which is related to, it's a Word and SharePoint issue that can result in remote code execution. So that one, although it's rated important by Microsoft, you should push out to all of your users on their workstations as soon as possible. MS14-002 is one that patches a vulnerability that I believe we talked about back in November or maybe even earlier, maybe October. there was some exploitation in the wild via they were using an Adobe Acrobat Reader vulnerability that was patched back in September, but a number of machines hadn't applied the patch yet. And they had given a fix-it. It was using the ndproxy.sys driver, and a workaround, a fix-it had been announced by Microsoft, but one of the issues with it was that it broke RDP, it broke remote desktop, and a couple other things. So they have now fixed the underlying vulnerability. So if you had applied the fix-it, redirected ndproxy.sys to null.sys or something like that. I don't remember now the details of the workaround. But if you had done that, you can undo that now, and you should be able to use RDP again. So those were the two Microsoft vulnerabilities I wanted to talk about. There are some Adobe patches, fixes to Reader and Acrobat and Air. I haven't really dug into the details of those yet. Today was also the day that Oracle is doing their quarterly patching, and their pre-release, their pre-announcement said that they were fixing 147 vulnerabilities or something across a number of products, including 30-some in Java. So I haven't seen the details on those yet. Hopefully I'll get a chance to look at that and probably talk about that a little more on next week's show. But be looking for a Java update, and that's one you probably want to apply right away as soon as you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's, especially Java, we know that there's, as I mentioned in the Yahoo malvertising attack, Java, client-side Java was one of the successful exploits that was dropping the malware onto the machine. So you definitely want to make sure that you're patched, keep that up to date as best as possible, so that, or if you don't need it, disable it. We talk about that a lot. A lot of people have Java enabled and they don't even have a need for it on a regular basis. So, all right, thanks for that, Jim. So let's go take a look at the Internet Weather Report for this week, and we got a few items to discuss here. Nothing major or drastic. The first one, port 1434 UDP, Microsoft SQL Server. We see this pretty frequently. We kind of have a noise floor of scanning activity that occurs. There was a spike back here maybe in January 2nd. This is the past 15 days of activity shown, by the way. But you can see that there were definitely some large peaks here, where we went from having not too many regular numbers of scan sources to having hundreds of them all scanning at the same time. When you see these types of events, it's usually indicative of some kind of botnet in play in order to instruct them to all scan at the same time. Within the past 7 days or so, we've been seeing a little more aggressive activity on that port. Could be all kinds of things, brute forcing, password guessing on the Microsoft SQL Server, looking for old versions that are vulnerable, etc. So if you have a Microsoft SQL Server exposed to the Internet, you'd want to make sure that that's locked down or at least filtered to only those people who need to actually access it based on the source IPs. What we're seeing is primary sources of activity, of this scanning activity, are coming from Australia and Indonesia. There's a smaller amount of traffic coming from a big group of Taiwanese IPs, but not as much in volume as the Australian and Indonesia IPs are involved in. Those are the parts of the world that are kind of involved in this one. The next one is that I thought was a little interesting and something to keep in mind. Port 21 TCP, which is FTP server, we're seeing a bunch of sources from Taiwan. And if you notice here, again, there's a pretty regular noise floor of scanning activity that occurs all the time, probably around between 10 and 20 scan sips per hour. But at a particular point here recently, within the past 24 hours actually, we saw a pretty large spike that jumped up to around 130 or more scan sources scanning for open FTP servers. So if you run an FTP server on the internet, you want to kind of monitor that for any kind of abuse. We know that there are certain actors out there who look for FTP servers that are open such that you can read and write files to them, and they'll use those as kind of their drop servers or sites for their other malicious activities. So if you have one like that, you'd want to be careful. You also want to make sure that there's no unauthorized access to your FTP server beyond what you normally expect. So if it allows anonymous access, it's fine, but hopefully that's only in a read-only type of way, maybe to deliver patches to your customers and whatnot. More often than not, what these actors are looking for are ones that they can use for their own purposes, where they can write stuff up there and read it back, or maybe even if they're old versions of FTP, there's different vendors for FTP servers out there, and some have vulnerabilities that can be exploited so that they can gain access to them. So you want to make sure you have an up-to-date version of your FTP server if it's got any of those authentication bypass vulnerabilities, etc. The next one is, this one we have almost zero noise floor, so you don't really see any scanning activity on a regular basis, but it's port 4569 TCP, which is actually the inter-asterisk exchange protocol. And we see that there's it stopped about 2 days ago, but prior to that we had maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 continuous days of pretty aggressive scanning coming from Canada, Vietnam, U.S. sources. And what this protocol is, as far as I understand it, I had to kind of look it up. It's basically, we've talked about Asterisk before, which is a voice over IP PBX software. It's freely available. People set it up to run their VoIP PBX gateways and whatnot. It's very robust and powerful as well. This is kind of a protocol for having multiple PBXs that kind of exchange data with each other. So maybe you have you're a small company, you've got a few branch offices in various cities, and you could have PBXs in each one that kind of are linked together, and that's what this protocol is for. So they might be looking for, maybe this attacker knows something about how to exploit that or use that to gain access to that PBX server, that asterisk PBX server. So if you have that open to the internet, it'd be a good idea to look for any kind of unauthorized access attempts. Lock it down to only maybe those ones that need to connect to it on that port. Since it is kind of an inter-asterisk thing, you might be able to lock it down to only those other asterisk PBXs that need to talk to it, as opposed to the entire internet. So here's the top most probe ports. Really nothing new here. At the top, other accounts for quite a bit this week. The real top spot is port 80 TCP. There could be a lot of explanations for that. People just scanning for websites that might have known vulnerabilities. Could be a variety of reasons for that one. 445 TCP, those are your configure and other related infections. There's a bunch of botnets that actually scan for 445 TCP to find vulnerable machines. Configure is probably one of the most notorious ones. 22 TCP, and I guess that's the only one on here of a remote access type one. That's SSH, and those are usually brute force guessing attacks where they're trying to log into the SSH server and gain access to it so they can use it for their own purposes. 135 TCP we talked about last week. That's also another NetBIOS protocol one. I don't know if we have much more detail on that one. 53 UDP is your DNS reflection attack type stuff. Could be people scanning for open DNS servers. You use them for their DNS reflection attacks. We might get a little bit of that noise in the actual attacks themselves showing up in some of this data. 1433 TCP. We talked about 1434 UDP, which is Microsoft SQL Server. 1433 TCP also is Microsoft SQL Server. It's just the TCP port for it. Again, that could just be searching for, like we said before, Microsoft SQL servers that are either unpatched or weak passwords, etc. We see a couple of the zero access ports here, the 16,000 range ones. 443 TCP also could be scanning for similar reasons as 80 TCP. And the ICMP echo request, not really sure. That might not be security related. Could be related to other scanning activity in general. In terms of the most sources probing, so these are the ones that have the most number of sources probing, not the most probes in general. We see 445 TCP, nothing new there. ICMP echo, I think this is reply, if I remember right. We see the zero access, or the 16,000 port ones. We're going to take a look at that picture in a second. 80 TCP, again, we see that. 8080, I've talked about this before. I think we saw this last week as well. This one's showing up a lot. Tomcat, I've mentioned this before. There's probably other software out there that runs an administrative kind of service on port 8080 by default. Tomcat's one of them. I know there's a lot of people who run Tomcat that leave this open to the world. You shouldn't. You should really restrict access to that with some kind of firewall or filter so that only administrators should be able to access the port 8080 port on your Tomcat server. And we know that there's been specific brute forcing activity trying to guess the administrative password. Obviously, people are trying Tomcat 123 passwords, things like that. More often than not, that's actually successful. So be careful if you're running any types of services like that. Especially this one is really only needed for administrators to upload new JSPs or WAR files and whatnot up to the Tomcat engine. This other one here is not really security related. 27015 UDP is actually related to gaming. It just happens to show up as scanning type activity because of the way that it's very distributed in the nature of the protocol. So zero access, we've been talking about this for several years now, probably. There was a pretty low noise floor. This is from a previous takedown activity. I think somewhere around December timeframe, we had mentioned that Microsoft did a takedown action. They actually claimed victory on that. There's some mention of a white flag message coming from the botnet operator saying that they give up and they released it. That's kind of speculation. Other than the fact that they really did push a plugin update that said literally the words white flag. What that means, people are guessing that means they've given up. But we do see that there's been kind of a steady decline. It's not real rapid, but it's definitely going down. This is probably due to the fact that maybe the botnet's not growing anymore, that they've kind of released it, and machines are getting cleaned up and no new machines are being added. So hopefully this will keep going down until there's no more infected machines out there. Just because someone releases a botnet, I guess I should point this out, this happens a lot, where a botnet controller might be taken down, but the bots themselves, when that happens, they don't necessarily get cleaned up. So they're basically orphaned. They're left out in the wind, and they're still trying to find the command and control, and there's no command and control to talk to anymore. So you get these orphaned infections out there that maybe the antivirus vendors haven't actually gotten a detection for to clean up, but the machines, it could be hundreds and thousands of machines out there that are still infected but are not under the control of anybody. That happens quite frequently. That's kind of what I suspect the situation is here, and hopefully we'll see this number decrease as we go. That's our show for today. As always, if you'd like to get in touch with us, and we always love to hear from our viewers and listeners, you can email us at threattrack@list.att.com. You can also find us on Twitter at the keyword @ThreatTraq. And the ThreatTraq video is also available at att.com/ThreatTraq, and it's also available on YouTube. You can subscribe to an audio-only version on iTunes. And once again, thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Jim, for joining me. And we'll be back next week with a new episode. Until then, keep your network safe.